Federation and read aloud at the University of Havana.
¡Viva Fidel!
Castro said he backs negotiations even though he remains suspicious of U.S. intentions.
I don't trust the politics of the United States, nor have I exchanged a word with them. Nevertheless, this is far from being a rejection of a peaceful solution of conflicts or dangers of war. To defend peace is the duty of everyone.
We cannot find anyone who believes Cuban leader Raul Castro is seriously considering a career as a stand-up comedian once relations are normalized with America. But we can find plenty of people who haven't stopped laughing since the dictator made his demand for the return of Guantanamo Bay and a boatload of cash before anyone starts shipping Cuban cigars by the legal ton. Here's someone else who is also not laughing. Director of the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies, specializing in Latin American affairs with an emphasis on Cuba. Dr. Jaime Suchlicki joins us today. Doctor, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Curious, I would like to get your immediate reaction because, as I just said, I spoke to a number of people and they started to laugh a little bit when they heard what Raul Castro wanted. Fair to say that no one really who understands the situation is laughing, but they understand that somebody like Raul Castro and that government, they will ask for the world no matter what, correct?
Well, he's raising the bar so high that he's going to preclude any normalizations of relations. The point here is that Fidel Castro is an ally of Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and China. So for Cuba, the United States is not important. What is important is the relation with those countries that provide significant amounts of aid without any condition and without requesting anything. So Raul Castro is convinced that the future of Cuba is best served by being an ally of Iran and Russia and China and Venezuela, and not the United States.
Okay, but is he getting it right? Because the countries that you mentioned, Iran, Russia, China, Venezuela, the Russian dollar is now worth paper pretty much. Venezuela has its own financial problems. Iran is busy fighting wars on several different fronts at this time. China's involved in other parts of the world. Is he making a tactical mistake here, thinking that money is going to keep flowing from these countries when it doesn't seem as if they have the money to spend or to burn?
Not from Cuba's point of view. Cuba's major exports are doctors, and he received $7 to $8 billion a year from doctors. Second, remittances from Cuban Americans that are anywhere between 800 million and $1 billion. And third, he gets tourism. So he has enough to survive and to model through. Not to modernize Cuba, not to help the Cuban people live better, but his interest is maintaining political control and passing that political control to his heirs once he dies or resigns, supposedly, in 3 years. So he's making a very calculated that American tourists will go to Cuba, that all of these countries, China, will continue to help Cuba, that Venezuela, although the price of petroleum is $45 a barrel, he's going to continue to get enough petroleum to help his economy. And the Russians, okay, they're going to give him weapons, and that's what he wants.
Are they still sitting then on the ideological side to believe that it's still communism, communism, communism first and foremost? Because when we look at it, there's still money involved here. This is still a country that is dirt poor in so many ways, and certainly the government has stashed away a lot of that money in their back pockets over the years. But aren't they just as greedy as everybody else? They want to make sure that good old American dollar walks in the door?
Well, look, if they were interested in helping the Cuban people, they would have done a deal with the United States many years ago. Neither Fidel nor Raul are really interested in better relations with the United States. They want unilateral concessions. And if President Obama is willing to take Cuba out of the terrorism list and is willing to return Guantanamo Bay, they're very happy. They'll probably turn it over to the Russians and let the Russians have Guantanamo Bay.
But they know that'll never happen, right? They do know that'll never happen. America is not going to give up Guantanamo Bay.
I don't know. I don't know. With this president, I don't know that. So I'm not sure. I'm almost sure that they're going to get Cuba out of the terrorist list, despite the fact that Cuba harbors terrorists, supports Hezbollah and Hamas. It's an ally of Iran. So I don't think Cuba should be removed. But I think the president and Secretary Kerry have indicated that they're willing to give Raul Castro another concession.
All right, you just brought up a very good point, but we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and talk about that, exactly what this president will or will not do. So please stand by a few moments. Break. We're going to be back. Some realities then from the Cuban public. Maybe the time's already come for America to drop a hammer or two, make Cuba come to grips with reality. But would the president truly be willing to hand over Gitmo and pay reparation money to the island nation of Cuba? We'll ask those questions, get some answers when we come back right here on MidPoint. Let's welcome back to MidPoint, Director of the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies, Dr. Jaime Suchlicki joins us. Doctor, let me get back to a point that you made, and it was very quick, but I wanted to make sure we focused on that.
Okay.
You were talking about the president, Gitmo, and so many of the other issues here. Do you honestly think, number one, that the president would be willing to feather his political nest and make this happen by giving away Guantanamo Bay and by basically paying reparations for 50 years, but let's add to this also that the Congress and the American people would let him get away with it?
Well, I don't know what the president can get away with. Reparations, Raul Castro is talking about $50 billion for the 50 years of the embargo and the supposedly hurting the Cuban people. I mean, that's nonsense, and I don't think the U.S. will pay that. Giving away Guantanamo, I think this president is liable to do that. My concern is that Guantanamo is one of the deepest bays in the Caribbean, ideal for submarines. And if Cuba were to turn that base to the Russians or tell the Russians that they can use that base, it would be a strategic disaster for the United States.
That in itself, though, would seem to be a reason why you cannot let this happen. The Congress wouldn't let it happen. The people wouldn't let it happen. The military wouldn't let it happen.
I know, but this is a decision that can be made by the president. He doesn't need Congress. He doesn't need the military. So I am concerned that the president is in a mode of giving concessions to countries. So he's willing to give that concession to Raul Castro. It would be a disaster for American security.
Can we then say, because as you pointed out in disaster, let's point out that what would happen here, because it's not as if the Cuban Navy is huge and needs the bay at this point, even if they have a Navy at this point of any real speaking,
right.
But they would invite the Russians to sit in there and basically use that base. That would change the absolute complex of the entire hemisphere.
Not only that, the Russians and the Cubans have an agreement already to use a Cuban base for the stopping of Russian aircraft in the Caribbean. So they've been playing with Cuba, the Russians, for a long time to establish a listening post electronically, to establishing a position to bring in the Russians' planes to Cuba. And now if they get Guantanamo, that would be fantastic for the Russians.
I guess it still is a little bit of a difficult thing for people to understand why the president would want to do that. But let me ask you, you study Cuba. Do you really think that this president would go that far in order to feed his own ego, to feed his legacy, that he would change the entire structure of the hemisphere militarily?
I am not going to read the mind of this president, but I've seen some things he's done. I see that he's giving concessions to Iran. I think he tried to give concessions to Putin, and Putin took over the half of or a big chunk of Ukraine and Crimea. So I am concerned that this president wants to diminish the position of the United States in the world and willing to provide concessions to leaders throughout the world. Leaders are not friendly to the United States. One thing is to provide concessions to allies of the United States and friends of the United States, but providing concessions to enemies of the United States that oppress their people and repress human rights is not a good policy.
Dr. Suchlicki, you're almost talking about treason.
I don't want to characterize my statement.
Let me just ask you this then, 30 seconds left. There has been a thinking process that we should take Cuba off the terrorist list. Do you agree with that?
No. Cuba harbors terrorists in the island, including terrorists that escaped from the United States, Spanish terrorists from the ETA group. Cuba supports Hezbollah and Iran in the Middle East and provides intelligence to those groups. Cuba is an ally of Iran. Cuba should remain in the list until Cuba offers meaningful, irreversible concessions.
Dr. Jaime Suchlicki, I think you have opened up an awful lot of eyes here in the last couple of minutes and certainly given us food for thought. I appreciate your comments, and trust me, we will talk again very soon.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Fast food on a slow track to poor earnings. Quality of food, dollars, Americans eating healthier, perish the thought. Bulls, Bears, and Bucks on board when we return right here on MidPoint.